Okay, Michelle.
I'm a little confused about the lethal versus non-lethal aid to Ukraine. In the past, a senior administration official told us that there was a worry on the part of the U.S. of working this kind of proxy war against Russia. Is that still the concern, or what really is the point of helping the Ukrainians militarily, but only up to the point of lethal aid?
Well, we do have an interest in making sure, Michelle, that the Ukrainian military isn't overrun by the separatists. The separatists have access to rather sophisticated military equipment because, as we have said on numerous occasions, the Russian military is actively supporting their efforts. NATO has produced photographic evidence of this, despite the denials, the hard-to-believe denials of Russian military and political leaders. So the fact is, Russian separatists are obtaining sophisticated military equipment from the Russians, and we want to make sure that the Ukrainian military doesn't get overrun. But at the same time, this is a conflict that will not be satisfactorily resolved on the battlefield. There is an opportunity for these differences to be resolved around the negotiating table. That's where they should be resolved, and the Ukrainian government will have the support of the international community as they try to engage these Russian-backed separatists in conversations. What we will do and what we'll continue to do is call on the Russians to use their influence with the separatists to encourage them to engage constructively in those conversations. Russia's failure to do that will put them at risk of sustaining even more economic costs that could be imposed by the international community. It's time for Russia to play a constructive role in this process, and the failure to do so has already led to significant economic costs being imposed on the Russian people and on the Russian economy.
And in all this time, including since the ceasefire, have you seen any step at all by Russia to do that, to use their influence to de-escalate it?
Mm-hmm. Well, there have been some indications that the Russians have taken some steps that are consistent with supporting the ceasefire agreement that was reached a couple of weeks ago. But we have seen, as we have in the past, some mixed signals from Russia on this. And so while there are some signs to be optimistic about the direction that this is headed, there's still a lot more work to be done to implement the ceasefire agreement, to convene the kind of negotiations that will ultimately resolve the differences between the Ukrainian central government and the separatists in the east.
So you're still seeing troops massed at the border?
Well, I'd refer you to the Department of Defense and other places about what the latest assessment is of the situation at the border, and what the latest assessment is of Russian military involvement in this conflict. But what we have seen is a pattern of Russia continuing to allow weapons and material to be transported across the border from Russia into Ukraine and into the hands of Russian-backed separatists.
So that's still happening.
Well, again, for the latest assessment, I'd refer you to the Department of Defense. But what we have consistently seen is, since the ceasefire agreement, we have seen the conflict de-escalate. That there are indications that the ceasefire is taking hold, but there have been sporadic exchanges of fire that indicate that there's still some work to be done to implement the ceasefire agreement. And then the ceasefire agreement, of course, would not be the end here. That would rather be the beginning, because that would hopefully, once the ceasefire was in place, open the door to the kinds of negotiations that would actually resolve the broader differences between the government and the separatists.
Thanks. You still don't see this as an invasion, and if not, why not?
Well, because what we have seen for several months now is the kind of activity in Ukraine by the Russians that blatantly violates the territorial integrity of that country. There is an international norm at stake here, which is that sovereign governments respect the borders of other sovereign governments. And Russia has acted in a way inconsistent with that international norm, and as a result, the international community has spoken with one voice and taken steps to impose economic costs on Russia for the failure to uphold those basic international norms.
It's not an invasion?
Well, what we've seen, Michelle, is activity by the Russians that flagrantly violates the territorial integrity of the sovereign nation of Ukraine. And the international community has taken action to impose costs on Russia for that flagrant violation. Okay, let's move around a little bit. Justin.